Today, I want to talk about transhumanism and the technological developments accompanying it that are actually making it viable for humans to dramatically extend our lifespan and our cognitive capacities. In fact, some of the leading figures in this field are actually talking about immortality, and they're not some tin-foiled hat basement dwellers. Transhumanism is an international cultural and intellectual movement with the eventual goal of fundamentally transforming the human condition by developing and making widely available technologies to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. It sees consciousness as the capacity to experience the world, to reflect upon it, and more importantly, to shape it. So what begins as humanism, our most sympathetic understanding and treatment of human nature, becomes transhumanism, which is the drive to fundamentally revolutionize what it means to be human by way of technological advancements. Changing human nature might be the most dangerous idea in all of human history, or perhaps the most liberating. And it uses the result of actual trends and future technologies to bring about beneficial societal change. This is how David Pearce, a leading figure of this movement, describes it.
In a nutshell, transhumanism is the idea that we can use technology to overcome our biological limitations. Any lightning account is inevitably going to be simplistic, but I personally conceive transhumanism in terms of the three supers: super intelligence, super longevity, and super well-being, or super happiness, if you like.
Superintelligence is the idea that instead of simply accepting our cognitive limitations, we can amplify our intellectual capacity. This may take the form of improving our own genetic code, or, if you will agree with Ray Kurzweil, simply fusing with our machines. Or, if one takes the scenario of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute trying to engineer non-biological artificial intelligence that is friendly towards humans, and when presented with a whole new problem that it's never encountered before, that it applies humanist standards. Now, on superintelligence, there's already a lot of work being done with AI and human-machine interfaces, and I will be doing a full episode on that very soon, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel. For now, let me show you what I'm talking about. This is Ray Kurzweil. In December of 2012, Kurzweil was hired by Google in a full-time position to work on new projects involving machine learning and language processing. Google co-founder Larry Page and Kurzweil agreed on a one-sentence job description: to bring natural language understanding to Google. And this is what he's got to say about superintelligence.
And the whole point of it is to extend our reach. Ever since we picked up a stick to reach a higher branch, we've used our tools to extend our reach. We can now already extend our reach mentally. I can take out a device from my pocket and access all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes.
And remember what happened the last time we expanded our neocortex? That was 2 million years ago when we became humanoids and developed these large foreheads. Other primates have a slanted brow. They don't have the frontal cortex. But the frontal cortex is not really qualitatively different. It's a quantitative expansion of neocortex. But that additional quantity of thinking was the enabling factor for us to take a qualitative leap and invent language and art and science and technology and TED conferences. No other species has done that. And so over the next few decades, we're going to do it again. We're going to again expand our neocortex, only this time it won't be limited by a fixed architecture of enclosure. It'll be expanded without limit. That additional quantity will again be the enabling factor for another qualitative leap in culture and technology. Thank you very much.
On the second and third subjects, super longevity and super well-being, I'll spend a little bit more time showing you information about these topics. As we all know, all living things tend to grow old and die. Whether we live 60 years or in extreme cases 12 decades, inevitably we tend to decay and experience a decline of our physical and intellectual capacities. Transhumanists think that instead of accepting this fact as unalterable, they recognize that humans are arguably the most adaptable species and that we can take it upon ourselves to influence nature in such a way that will allow us to escape the decay and death that for millennia seemed inevitable. Now, I will outline two strategies that can be used to reach this objective. First one is led by the work of Aubrey de Grey at Cambridge. His research focuses on whether regenerative medicine can thwart the aging process. He works on the development of what he calls strategies for engineered negligible senescence, a collection of proposed techniques to rejuvenate the human body and stop aging. To this end, he's identified 7 types of molecular and cellular damage caused by essential metabolic processes. He's known for his view that medical technology may enable human beings alive today to live to lifespans far in excess of any existing authenticated cases. But let's hear it from Dr. Gray himself.
My name's Aubrey de Grey. I'm a biomedical gerontologist based in Cambridge, and I'm the Chairman and Chief Science Officer of a foundation called the Methuselah Foundation. I'm interested in research to combat the process of aging in mammals and eventually in humans by biotechnological means. And I'm doing this because ultimately aging is very bad for you. It causes an immense amount of suffering, and of course it kills 100,000 people a day, which is twice as many as everything else that kills anyone, all added together. I think it's rather important to do this. I think that old people are people too, so the fact that aging only kills old people is not a reason not to be working on defeating it.
And so eventually, the body gets to the point where it's got too much damage and things start to go downhill. That's all that aging is. It's a really, really simple concept. And when people tell you we don't know what aging is, they're talking nonsense. That we do know what aging is. That's all it is. So it is simply having too much of the damage that being alive causes. That's all that age-related diseases are about. That, in fact, the people who are young enough to benefit from these first therapies that give this moderate amount of life extension, even though those people are already middle-aged when the therapies arrive, will be at some sort of cusp. They will mostly survive long enough to receive improved treatments that will give them a further 30 or maybe 50 years. In other words, they will be staying ahead of the game. The therapies will be improving faster than the remaining imperfections in the therapies are catching up with us. This is a very important point for me to get across because, most people, when they hear that I predict that a lot of people alive today are going to live to 1,000 or more, they think that I'm saying that we're going to invent therapies in the next few decades that are so thoroughly eliminating aging that those therapies will let us live to 1,000 or more. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the rate of improvement of those therapies will be enough. They'll never be perfect, but we'll be able to fix the things that 200-year-olds die of before we have any 200-year-olds, and the same for 300 and 400 and so on.
The smartest way for us to proceed in our current primitive technological state being to use evolution's tricks as much as possible. So, of course, the standard technique that most people are using for gene therapy, for getting genes into our bodies, is to use viruses, which have evolved for that exact purpose. And, of course, the default mode of a virus is to be bad for us, but because viruses have such compact DNA, we can engineer that DNA. We can take out the particular genes that make the viruses bad for us and replace them with genes that we want to introduce into the cell. We can also use viruses and other related genetic tricks to actually alter the DNA that's already in our cells by a process called gene targeting, and that may be very important, especially for the approach that I think we're going to have to use to really cure cancer.
Well, the first implication, of course, is enormously good news, namely that the problem of so many people being over the age of 65 won't be a problem anymore because those people will be able to look after themselves because they'll be healthy. The whole idea here is to keep people in a youthful state so that they can continue to contribute wealth to society. After all, let's face it, the only reason we give money to people to do nothing from the age of 65 is because we're very sorry for them. I'm going to tell you the genuine mainstream answer to your question, which I happen to agree with, which is that no, aging is not a product of selection. Evolution is simply a product of evolutionary neglect. In other words, we have aging because it's hard work not to have aging. You need more genetic pathways, more sophistication in your genes in order to age more slowly, and that carries on being true the longer you push it out. So to the extent that evolution doesn't care whether genes are passed on by individuals living a long time or by procreation. There's a certain amount of modulation of that, which is why different species have different lifespans, but that's why there are no immortal species. I personally, for example, don't get enough sleep because I'm traveling all the time, I'm on the road, I'm trying to get this stuff to happen. And from a purely health point of view, that's probably bad for me. It's probably shortening my life. But I'm pretty sure that I'm bringing forward the day when these therapies will arrive by a larger amount than I'm shortening my life. So even in my own personal selfish terms, I'm probably winning. And of course, I'm not only doing it for selfish terms, I'm doing it to save your life as well. Start trying. So, of course, there are some biologists in the audience, and you see, I want to give some answers to some of the questions that you may have. You may have been dissatisfied with this talk, but fundamentally, you have to go and read this stuff. I've published a great deal on this. I cite, the experimental work on which my optimism is based, and there's quite a lot of detail there. The detail is what makes me confident of my rather aggressive timeframes that I'm predicting here. So, if you think that I'm wrong, you'd better damn well go and find out why you think I'm wrong. And of course, the main thing is that you shouldn't trust people who call themselves gerontologists because, as with any radical departure from previous thinking within a particular field, you expect people in the mainstream to be a bit resistant and not really to take it seriously. So, you've got to actually do your homework in order to understand whether this is true.
Let's look at the last section that deals with the issue of well-being. Imagine you're soon to be a parent. Your doctor informs you that if you wanted, you could choose certain features of your child's biology. You could choose how genetically prone to depression it will be, their levels of anxiety, jealousy, anger, and even their pain threshold. Would you choose a high likelihood of chronic depression, an intolerably low pain threshold? How about panic attacks and anxiety? Probably not. The last major branch of transhumanism, spearheaded by philosopher David Pearce, aims to investigate and phase out suffering. He argues that ultimately all our conscious states, our feelings, our moods and emotions are all an expression of our brain chemistry. For Pearce, it is clear that natural selection hasn't designed us to be happy, it's designed us to survive and pass on our genes. A species that is permanently anxious and discontented will have a higher motivation to watch out for predators and take precautions for survival. But in today's world, these emotions are vicious. Our biology has barely changed in 200,000 years, which means whilst culture and society have made progress, we are still those same aggressive, jealous, and anxious savanna-dwelling hunter-gatherers. This is why Pearce argues that if we ever want to increase the well-being of our species, we will have to edit our genes. Abolitionists argue that we should start using modern technologies to minimize and eventually abolish suffering, ushering in an era of so-called super well-being. Every child is a roll of the genetic dice. Pearce argues that the least we can do is load the dice in our favor to create happier, healthier, and longer living humans.
super well-being or super happiness, which is my particular focus, transhumanists believe that it's possible to phase out the biology of involuntary suffering. Now one can conceive this purely negatively in terms of getting rid of depression, anxiety disorders, malaise, and all those unpleasant fitness-enhancing adaptations that helped our genes leave more copies of themselves on the African savannah. But it's also possible to conceive more radical forms of intervention, of genetic engineering, and I personally both advocate and predict that we aim for life animated by information-sensitive gradients of bliss, bliss that may be orders of magnitude richer than anything physiologically feasible today. But perhaps it's worth stressing that being blissful is not the same thing as being blissed out, although perhaps a minority of transhumanists would not be too disappointed if we did live lives as, so to speak, wireheads or its pharmacological equivalent. Most transhumanists focus on high-functioning well-being, well-being that is both super-intelligent and pro-social, to say the least. And yes, that is my own focus, working out ways to radically enrich our well-being without at the same time compromising intellectual performance or our sense of social responsibility.
One of the main issues facing transhumanist ideals is that they are seen as far-fetched or perceived as just science fiction. But this is not accurate. We are already transhuman. We're living longer, integrating more with technology, and emphasizing quality of life. We're in the process of redesigning what it is to be human, only the effects are still so subtle and so slow that it doesn't look like very much. But these changes will come faster and faster, and it's only wise to be an active, informed participant in the next stage of human development. Thank you all very much for watching this episode. I'm restarting this YouTube channel in a bit of a different format, and there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot of editing that's quite rough in this video. I'm gonna try and get better at this. With any constructive criticism that you might have, it will be very, very much appreciated. So just leave a comment or send a private message, whichever you prefer. I will be doing a few more episodes that will complement this one very nicely. One on artificial intelligence and Neuralink, and another one on robotics. So if you want to support what I'm doing, hit that like button and subscribe. And again, thank you very much for watching.